Hello and welcome to Studio RC, an encouragement for your recovery and your faith. My name is Pastor Max. I am an alcoholic and I'm sober today only by the grace of God and the fellowship of the program as contained in our literature. I am also a follower of Jesus. So this is part 2 of Marks of a Transformed Life, both in your recovery and your faith. And just to give a quick recap, we asked the question. So many of us ask the question personally: how do I know that I'm getting better, that things are improving in my life? And the big book tells us so often that we see transformation in others before they can see it in themselves. But I wanted to give you some marks that people will maybe still see in you before you see it, but some ideas of areas that you can take note of that, oh, I'm doing all right in that area. Oh, I could grow in that area. To know that transformation is happening. And these different marks of a transformed life are not steps 1, 2, 3, 4 like the steps in recovery. They're different signposts. They're different indicators to indicate the transformation is happening. And God may be transforming you in one area and not another, or a little bit more in one area, and it's not an even or necessarily even a linear process. But transformation is about what God is doing in us and us cooperating with God, letting God do what God wants to do in us. So there's that picture of surrender and transformation. The example I gave last episode, it's not like a cherry tree trying to become an orange tree. It's about a cherry tree trying to grow up into what it was meant to be, a cherry tree. So whatever God has gifted you with, pre-addiction, some of the characteristics in your life, your personality, extrovert versus introvert, some of your interests, some of your loves, some of those things are hardwired in by God. There will be transformation that takes place, but ultimately a cherry tree is a cherry tree. Now a cherry tree might have been diseased, and now we've taken out the disease, and so that we can fully be all that we've been called to be. And so you've been uniquely called in your area of life, with the people that you interact with, the relationships that you have, the interactions and how your life intersects with other people. It does so uniquely, and God wants to use that, and sometimes has even orchestrated it so that your life is exactly like that, so that you can reach others when no one else can, and you can touch people's lives in a way that encourages others. This transformative process is ongoing, and it's not only ongoing, but it's happening in real time in our lives every day. We're growing and changing and seeing new insights and trying to live this life out. We're trying to live a picture of a transformed life. And so what we've been basing our teaching on, and again, this is part 2 of 2 parts, but on Romans 12. And Paul had written this beautiful 11 chapters of deep doctrine and about the outlining the mystery of the gospel. And then he makes this shift in Romans 12, and he launches the early believer into this rapid fire understanding of living out spiritual transformation. And the chapter displays what we've picked out as 8 marks that can serve as guideposts directing believers toward transformed life. Last week we looked at the first one was surrender, coming from Romans 12:1 about being a living sacrifice. The second one was renewal, highlighted about the renewal of our minds and our approach, and how that renewal and spiritual awakening are connected. And then we talked about service and serving others, humble service, and how a transformed life is really marked by humble service. And where we left off was the 4th item, which was love. And so I said it's the best place to end and begin, and I believe that love is transformational. But let's talk about love in regards to a mark of a transformed life. We want to push this love to the forefront, and have this understanding that living out our a transformed life is understanding, I guess, the purity involved with the Christian ideal of love. It is the love more associated with a hero's death than a romantic comedy's fairy tale ending. It's not I love pizza. It's this love for others. It's this service of others. For most of us, it is the removal of hypocrisy that must come first. That we want to have our life lined up with God's standards so that we can help and encourage others in their lives. And one of the most effective ways of doing that is by guiding other believers, other people in recovery, into closer community with one another. And love is essentially the choice to value the needs of another rather than your own. If you're in a relationship or if you're married, I would say love equals service. If you look at 1 Corinthians 13, all the words, none of them are feeling words. They're all about service to one another. And so transformation shows up in many forms in a believer's life. But love is one trait that Christ clearly said would distinguish our lives from the rest of the world, is how we love and how we love others. So a transformed life is marked by genuine love. And genuine love usually looks like service. Again, if you're a married person, my encouragement is your goal should be to outserve your spouse. And if you're trying to outserve your spouse 100-0, and conversely, your spouse is trying to outserve you 100-0, you might get to that 50-50 that everyone looks for. But I know if I aim for 50-50, I know that I'm always going to overvalue what I do and undervalue my partners. So love is not about keeping score. It's about serving others. And we have good days and bad days, as will our partner and the people that we love and are trying to love. If you've ever loved somebody in early recovery, that it's not always easy, and there are some bumps along the road for sure. And if you've sponsored somebody and they relapsed, and maybe even some have passed away, it breaks our heart. But in loving others, we have to be open to that. That's the only way we pour ourselves into others and open ourselves up. But when we open ourselves up to love others, there is the chance to be hurt. So some people don't even engage, but love is what gives life meaning and value and a lot of joy when we're able to love and serve others. Love, a genuine love, can be defined as this deep, selfless care for others, rooted in our understanding of God's love for us, and it enables us to love ourselves and others unconditionally. Now, this doesn't mean that I have to be a doormat. Whatever you say, because I love you, they're sometimes putting up boundaries and having those boundaries in place are also a sign of love. And I think many addicts and alcoholics or even parents or families of addicts and alcoholics struggle very much with this. I want to show my love, but how can I want to show tough love. And it becomes a real challenge. And so love, when it comes down to it, whether tough love, every love is about being useful to God and others. And how can I show that love to God and others? Love is a fundamental concept, and it guides us on how we interact with God, or ourselves, others in recovery. It tells us in the Big Book, a famous line, we feel that love and tolerance of others is our code. And I always like to tell people, it's probably, instead of tolerance, maybe acceptance is a better word, because I think tolerance seems like the lowest form of acceptance. And I don't think that was the heart of what Bill W. was writing. But we feel that love, and I'll say, and acceptance of others is our code. Like that's how we live. That's how we do recovery. That's how we do faith. And it tells us in the 12 and 12, love is the very essence of our being. Love is an active force. We have learned that love is a healing force in our lives. And it is. Loving other people, forgiving other people, even the people who have hurt us and wronged us. That's where freedom truly comes. As we receive love from God and from our recovery community, from our faith community, we are empowered to love ourselves as well as others. And it's love, again, it's not about a feeling. It's about an action, and that action of service. So that's the fourth mark of a transformed life. The fifth mark, coming from verse 11, is diligence. Diligence. It tells us, do not lack diligence. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. So often we hear that the Christian life's not a sprint, but a marathon, and it goes for recovery, and it's almost cliche. But it's cliche because it's real. It's true. As God's people, as people in recovery, we must persist. Discipleship has much to do with delayed gratification, as does our recovery. I want what I want, and I want it now. It has to be put on the shelf. And we live in a culture with instant everything. Fervency seems to be something best left to the Puritans of yesteryear. Let them wait on delayed gratification. I'm going to order it from Amazon, and it'll be here in a couple hours. For some of us, and if you're in a big city, you can order stuff and be there the same day. That's crazy. But we are so used to microwaves and doing things quickly. But a transformed life is marked by this determined diligence, this internal fruit of maturity comes out in this steadiness and this willing to wait. Diligence can be defined as the persistence and faithful pursuit of recovery, personal growth, and the will of God. Diligence in the recovery process means working the steps, attending meetings, maintaining that consistent relationship with God and the fellowship as well as with church. It tells us in the big book, we're not cured of alcoholism. I mean, we can be recovered, but we're not cured of alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. As long as I'm doing this every day and I'm being diligent about my pursuit. And then it tells us in the 12 and 12, the spiritual life, it's not a theory. We have to live it. It's not some theological abstraction. It's a tangible thing that we live out. And so we have to be diligent. Diligence in recovery, it requires us to stay committed, one day at a time. Even when life becomes difficult or when we face setbacks, the journey requires us to be intentional and persistent in our pursuit of spiritual growth. Be diligent. The sixth item is perspective. Verse 12 carries from Romans 12, carries the impact of moving through difficulties. Rejoice in hope, be patient in affliction, be persistent in prayer. True gospel transformation requires faith. We believe that through faith in God's grace, we become a follower of Jesus. But faith does not have its ending point at the moment of conversion. Faith is required to please God. It's through the lenses of faith that believers should see the work of God in their own lives, knowing that we are often bruised by life. The perspective of faith allows us to see beyond our present circumstances. Faith is an active portion of how we view the current condition of life. If I am able to see that there are God's promises, whatever is going on today are in the light of God's promises. If I can't see with faith that God is good and God has promises, today the circumstances will dictate how I see life. Maintaining a perspective of faith, it's going to keep us as believers and people in recovery in this state of reliance on our higher power, upon our reliance upon Jesus. And it's in the active reliance that living out our transformation is even possible. A transformed life is marked by a perspective of faith. Now, we can define perspective as this transformed outlook on life, where we see ourselves, others, and the world through the lenses of a spiritual understanding and gratitude. Perspective. The process of recovery, it gives us a new way of viewing our past, our present, and our future, and it allows us to make peace with our past and live with purpose. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it, because it becomes it becomes redeemed, and it becomes something that we can help others with, all because there's a changed perspective. No longer are we shackled by guilt and shame and remorse because we've run it through the steps. We've admitted it to God and others. We've made amends, and so our past becomes this asset. The 12 and 12 tells us, when we look back, we realize that the circumstances of our lives were only stepping stones to a better life. Again, perspective. A transformed perspective allows us to see challenges as opportunities for growth and gives us the ability to find peace and purpose even in our suffering. That is not limited to saints or martyrs. It is for the everyday person living out their recovery and living out their faith that we can see that our challenges are really just opportunities of growth and to grow closer to God and to serve others. The seventh item of a mark of a transformed life is community. And I think a lot of these elements touch on community, but we are encouraged. You want to keep believers in community. You want to keep recovery people in community. We talk about fellowship. In Romans 12, it tells us in verses 13 through 20, it gives us this model for us remaining close to one another. I mean, the language of the passage points to the needs we have: sharing, hospitality, blessing, weeping, peace, hunger, thirst. Meeting these needs for one another is where a transformed life shows itself. But our needs to be met, in order for our needs to be met, community must be valued. Our fellowship must be valued. We often live in a community that is not often in community with one another. If we think about our neighborhoods and some of those things, many people live in a community, but it's not often in community with one another. That's heartbreaking. That is sad. Whether it's recovery, in the rooms of recovery, recovery church, whether it's your home church, ideally, we're not only living in community, but we're in community with one another. And maybe if you only go on Sunday morning and aren't part of a small group, or aren't part of the Bible study, or if you only go to one meeting a week, and all those things, and you're not connecting with others. We want to live in a community that is in community with one another. That's true community. It brings together those who are when we get in community, who are individually transformed by whether it's the steps or the gospel, so that we may share our lives and help those who are coming who haven't yet experienced the transformation or looking into the transformation. In order to weep with someone, you have to be more than physically near them. Just because you live next to somebody doesn't mean you can weep with them. You have to be in their life. You have to know that someone passed away, or they're facing illness or their struggles in their life, and then you've earned that right and the ability to weep with somebody. We must pursue transformation in order to take on the heart of Christ. You know, Jesus who wept at the tomb of a friend. Community is the place that is the catalyst for change. A transformed life is marked by living in community with other believers, other people in recovery. Community can be defined as being an active part of a recovery fellowship, supporting and being supported by others who share in the journey of transformation. Recovery community it's essential in recovery. It provides accountability, encouragement, and a place to belong. We don't recover alone. How often do we go to a meeting and we hear God speak to us through another person? Community is so important. The Big Book tells us we are people who normally would not mix, but there is among us a fellowship, a friendliness, an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. The family is the key to recovery, it tells us in 12:12, and the fellowship becomes the family of choice. There is such a warm environment and a welcoming environment in these communities. Community is a support system where we can share our struggles and our triumphs, where others walk alongside of us, offering understanding, care, and encouragement. Honestly, there's no better way of doing life than with others. And our final trait or mark of a transformed life is righteousness. This is the practicing these principles in all our affairs. It's a model of a life worthy of both recovery and the gospel. The final verse of Romans 12 reads, "Do not be conquered by evil, but conquer evil with good," with righteousness. Paul taught us that we had been given the ministry of reconciliation because God has made the one who did not know sin to be sin for us, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. That's from 2 Corinthians 5:21. Our lives, both lived and in leading, show that we are more sometimes interested in displaying Christ's righteousness than gaining a victory over someone's ill will toward us. We want righteousness, so we don't want to waste our life messing about with sin. We are taught in Romans 8:29, for those he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, so that he would be the firstborn among many brothers. Many of us ask, can I be righteous? That has to be removed from the minds of believers, the minds of people in recovery. Instead, our thought each day should be, how will Christ's righteousness be displayed in me? How will I carry these principles into all my affairs? A transformed life is marked by righteousness. And I will tell you this, the longer you stay sober, the less and less that becomes, acceptable behavior. And I also, the longer we stay sober, we want more and more of less and less, both so that materialistically, but spiritually, less things become okay with us the longer we stay sober. The bar continues to be raised in what is okay for behavior. I used to be okay with having a full-out fight, and now I'm not okay with even snapping at a family member, and it's just, again, that progression. Righteousness is defined as living a life that reflects the moral integrity, aligning with God's will, and pursuing justice, honesty, and purity in our thoughts, our words, and our actions. Righteousness is about making amends, living with integrity, turning away from being self-centered, our self-centeredness that so often is a characteristic of our addiction. It's about loving others. It tells us in the big book we were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Again, so that we could be useful according to the 7-step prayer. The spiritual journey, it tells us in the 12 and 12, is one of the deepest inner transformation and righting of our wrongs. It gives us freedom to do that. And we're not acting good so that God will love us. We are responding to God's love by righteousness, by showing, you have showed me this love, and I want to live in a way that honors and pleases you. Righteousness is about living in alignment with God's moral will. We talk about in the 4th step on moral inventory. It's a gradual transformation where we, again, seek to live honestly, which in the beginning might be hard. Sometimes, we've lied even when we haven't had to lie. Or when someone asks us, where have you been? What have you been doing? But we start to live honestly and answer those questions. We live justly and with humility, recognizing our need for grace. The mark of a transformed life, they're merely the signs of our higher power, of Jesus' presence in us. God keeps his promises to conform us into the image of his son Jesus, for us as people of faith, those who are still wrestling with the higher power, that God will mold us into look more and more like God and what God is hoping. And God's not hoping to just initiate transformation, but that he has guaranteed it for his people. He's not like, I hope that you change. No, the very nature of being in relationship with God will bring about transformation. That's the beauty. That's the promise. It's not about keeping rules to enjoy Christ, but it's about experiencing the transformation of being in relationship with Jesus, with our higher power. These 8 marks of transformed life, they play just an integral role in our faith and our recovery journey. We can see how we're doing in each of these areas. We're being shaped more and more into the image of Jesus as we experience his transforming power in our lives. The 12 steps provide a framework for this transformation. I often say, I don't know of any better discipleship model than the 12 steps of recovery. It's through our continuous surrender and trust in God's grace that we experience true freedom from addiction, and I will go so far as to say true freedom in all areas of our lives. Recovery is not just about abstinence. It is about a life that reflects the deep and lasting transformation that only God can bring. And I promise you, it is God's desire to bring about transformation, and there's nothing better than experiencing transformation except seeing it in somebody else. Once we've experienced transformation, we continue to transform. The greatest joy is in helping others and pointing them in the way and in the direction that will lead for them to experience transformation. That's true joy. Thanks so much for coming out to Studio RC in this second part of the marks of a transformed life. Hopefully this was encouraging. Hopefully this was helpful. Again, to give a read to Romans 12, and you can see it for yourself how some of the points were picked out and how we paralleled that with our recovery. But know that you can live a transformed life, and that God wants to transform our lives. And when we engage with God, it's hard to have anything other than a transformed life. Thanks so much for coming to Studio RC. We encourage you to like, to subscribe, to share, to comment, to do all those things so that others may have the opportunity to hear this message, especially if you found it encouraging. We want to make sure we get it out there to encourage others in their recovery and in their faith as well. Remember, Recovery Church, 12 steps, one goal. God bless, and we'll see you next time.